The question that we received the most was actually about trends and kind of what we see happening in the space at a high level, what gets us excited about new things happening in hardware development. So let's kick it off with you, Kyle.
Absolutely. So some of the general things that I see are most exciting are some of the digitization of component information. Um, it's really exciting to me because so much of the information that we want to find, especially as engineers, is stuck in a PDF somewhere and is so difficult to find. I get really excited by the fact that a lot of, especially manufacturers, are starting to digitize that component information and that data sheet information and make it more publicly available. For instance, if you go to a lot of capacitor manufacturers are doing this, like Kemet, if you go to their website, you can start to see and actually download and manipulate that component information. So that's pretty exciting for me. On the same vein, some of the manufacturers for microcontrollers and chips are starting to build a lot more code template generators. I love MX Cube Studio. Fantastic tool for just getting from 0 to 1 on a production design. And again, it's part of this like digitization of the component information. In this term, it's like a chip. And then finally, in also a similar vein, is this integration that I see improving around the CM and in designer interface. So a lot more CMs are accepting a lot more information, accepting different information formats like raw design files. If you have the IP considerations that you can allow that, it's a fantastic way to communicate more information to the CMs to make sure they're building the right product and understand the changes that are being made. I think the holy grail is when all of these systems start to integrate a little better and communicate on a standard language, which we're always interested in, always working on. But even in general, just seeing all of these industries improve is really exciting.
What about you, Kaethe?
Oh, I don't want to be the pessimist here, but I do think it's important to talk, as we're talking about hot trends, that we're excited about. I also think it's important to talk about like what are the trending topics that, I don't want to say keep me up at night, but maybe keep my clients up at night. And so I do think it is really important to mention, the global electronic component shortage that is still ongoing. And it's a component shortage, but it's also a supply chain disruption. And without getting into too much history, I mean, during my Dragon days, Dragon was owned by Avnet, which I think is the largest electronic components distributor globally still. And so there was electronic component shortage back then, very difficult to get to capacitors, for example. It impacts large companies and small. The problem for startups is you're going, oh, I only need, 10 capacitors per product, and I'm only making 250,000 devices. So like a fairly small number of capacitors. And then you look at how many capacitors are in the Ford F-150 computer boards, how many capacitors are on your iPhone 12. And you can understand why if a distributor has a choice between giving Apple or Ford the capacitors that they need for their products and giving you, your 200 per product or however many I just said, you're going to be pushed to the bottom of the pile. So I was listening to an event earlier this week where a VC I very much admire was saying she was shocked and appalled that some of their portfolio companies have resorted to like trolling eBay for various components. I don't know if it's capacitors. Kyle, you'll have a better thumb on this than I. But certainly, sensors and certain chips, it's an issue. So there was a shortage back 2 years ago. I think it recovered slightly, but then we were hit by, tariff wars globally, which had a big impact. And then there was a global pandemic, which is still, we're seeing the after effects of that. I do think this will continue for a long time. Eventually, I do think we'll get back to normal. Let's be positive about that. So there's a positive trend, but I do think right now it behooves anyone making physical products in the hardware space, the connected space, to plan ahead and then make a plan B and then make a plan, B.1, C, D, etc. Consider whether you need to dual source your critical components. So again, to Kyle's point, if you've identified on a 1 through 5 scale, certainly those highest risk components or cost driving components, I think it's just be very aware on a per component basis what the lead times are for everything that goes into your product and your packaging as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. The lead time for a startup to get a component, even 1,000 components, sounds like could actually be even greater than a larger company trying to get a larger size of components, just because of that relationship.
And the buying power is not there. I mean, I think you'll see echoes of this throughout that supply or throughout the product development process, where I can't tell you how many times startups come in and they're like, we want Apple quality, in the plastics. We want it to be white. We want it to be high sheen. However, you're going to define your CMF, your colors, materials, and finish. And the problem is you might want Apple quality, but you're going to pay for it. And you can't demand 120-day payment terms like Apple can. And so, understand what the echoes of demanding Apple quality have throughout your schedule and your cost and everything else, and particularly now. So again, I know I brought us down and being a pessimist, but I do think it's important to be aware of, no matter what stage you're at, it's the quotes you're seeing, if they're 6 months old, it's like, oh, sure, you can get these chips, these sensors in 12-week lead times. It's probably not 12 weeks anymore.
Yeah, so as you say, Apple, one of the things I think about when thinking of trends is how the lines are blurring between what's a hardware product and what's a software product. I feel like a lot of hardware companies are becoming software companies and the other way around. And I see kind of a tighter integration going forward of other development as well. So it used to be that software development happens in this schedule, in this side of the wall, in this methodologies, and hardware has its own version of it. And we see more and more kind of the interconnections, because these products nowadays, they require a higher integration. And so getting people to be in similar schedules, like we hear a lot of hardware companies that run on 2-week design sprints and stuff like that, which maybe like 5 years ago, hardware wasn't aware of, that's how software gets developed or whatever. Sharing tools and practices. We see a lot of teams making the move to Git, or doing Agile, or using Kanban boards, or using ticketing systems and tracking. So it's kind of like the blending of those two worlds together. That gets me really excited, because I think going forward, the successful hardware companies are going to be those that have very well integrated products where the software and the hardware kind of run side by side and operate very well.